Fortunately, I like to hear myself talk, so we should be good. My name's Brandon Carlson, and I'm the JV speaker today because we had a couple other speakers that couldn't make it, so hope I live up to your expectations. This conference so far, I've gotten some awesome feedback. How's everybody think the conference is going so far? Very cool. Thanks for all the organizers for this. This is pretty awesome. The first conference, and it seems to be going off fairly well. So, all right. Like I said, my name is Brandon Carlson. I'm here to talk to you today about compliance and DevOps. And how many people, when they hear the word compliance, they get excited? Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. Okay, yeah, it's not really the most sexy topic, is it? Right? So, I was working at a financial services firm, and at this financial services firm, we always had all these like regulations and stuff we had to deal with. And then the compliance audit would come once a year or whatever, and how do you think that made me feel? Feel like crap? How do you guys feel when you hear compliance audit? Like that? Because that's what it makes me feel like. At least it did. Is this what? Everybody's running around like crazy trying to get all these things together, all this documentation together, and you got to write a bunch of stuff up that you didn't ever want to write up, and you got people on your back, right? It's hell on earth. At least that's what I used to think. Okay? And now before somebody has a seizure, I'm going to get off of this slide. And this is kind of what I think about now when I think of compliance audit. What do you guys think about that? Lost all credibility, didn't I? All credibility just went out the window. This guy likes compliance audits? Well, no, that's not necessarily true, but I had an experience. I was working at this software as a service company, and we hired this new CISO guy, this security guy. And we were doing Agile, we were doing the Agiles, and the security guy came in, and he's like, we need to do secure code reviews. We go, we do pair programming, bro. We don't need that stuff, right? He's like, no, you need all this stuff, and you need documentation, you need traceability. He said, we don't need any of that stuff. And so, needless to say, I butted heads a little bit with the security guy. Over time, we kind of gave in, and we were like, okay, well, we could do some of this stuff you need us to do for documentation. We can add these features, but we do test-driven development, man. You got to go TDD style. And okay, whatever this TDD thing is, he started getting along with us a little bit better. We started talking about it more, and we were using a tool called Fitness. How many people know what Fitness is? All right, there's a few old schoolers in the house, right? Nobody uses Fitness anymore. But Fitness is an acceptance test tool if you're doing ATDD, test-driven development. So we're using Fitness, and what we started doing is whenever he would have some compliance requirement, what we would do is we created a new test suite in Fitness called like NIST ISO compliance. And then we would write the documentation for the compliance audit. We'd write the control information in the Fitness page. And then we'd turn that Fitness page into an automated test, right? So let's say there was password retry logic, right? We actually wrote an automated test that said for this NIST control, given a user tried to unsuccessfully log in, then this was what happened. The users would increase their invalid attempts by 1. The secure log would be written. It contains this information, and we turn that into an automated test. So that was kind of our way of pushing back on the information security team and saying, hey, we'll do this stuff, but you got to do it our way. And the most amazing thing happened to me about, 8 or 9 months later when we had our first audit. The government auditor came in. And he said, I need all your documentation for all the controls that you have for the application on the application security side. I said, okay, great. And I went into the Fitness page, and I clicked on the little NIST ISO compliance suite, and I clicked Run. And while the guy was sitting there, I was talking to him, and this little green, 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 green. And eventually, about 5 minutes later, all this green is on the page, and I clicked print, and I sent it to my printer, and I picked it up and I dropped it on his lap, and I said, there you go. And he kind of looked at me funny. What the heck is that? I said, oh, we automated all of our compliance. You what? So yeah, we automated all of our compliance stuff, all our controls. So then we went in and I said, watch. And I actually went into the code and I deleted the password retry logic and the password failed attempts stuff. And I reran the test again. Said green, green, red, green, red, red, green. And he started seeing things fail. And if you've ever seen an auditor excited, that was the day. I've never seen it before. I didn't think it happened. I didn't think they had a personality, right? But they did. He was ecstatic, and he was like, this is incredible. He goes, how often do you run this? So we had our big monitor outside my office, and I said, oh, hey, let's go look. And we went out, and we had run like 22 times that day. This is by 3 in the afternoon, because our continuous integration platform, every time we made a code change, right, we ran all our tests. Now, one thing that I've never gotten in an audit, besides a smile on the auditor's face, is he said, is this stuff in your marketing materials? And we said, no. Why would we put this stuff in marketing? He says, I'm going to tell you a dirty little secret. The security folks rule the government, so all they have to do is not like somebody else or just not like you, and you've got a competitive advantage or disadvantage. And so he said, why don't you put all this stuff into your marketing materials for your government clients? You ever had an auditor tell you to enhance your marketing to sell better to government? I always thought they just beat us up, right? So I had this experience. I said, oh my gosh, this is super cool. I've actually had a good experience in an audit. And you know what else he did? Or what he didn't do? He didn't ask for anything else. He was so wowed by the fact that we had this printout that we could just print and hand off to him. He was like, he was probably in my office 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and that was it, and we were done. Would you guys like to have an audit experience like that? Yeah. Well, you can. And it's not really as difficult as we think, but there are some major challenges. And so what I want to talk to you today is some of the things that you can do to have a positive audit experience and actually work with security and compliance, because actually it's pretty important. How many people in this room have got free credit monitoring? Come on, I know more, Yeah, I've got it from a couple of times, And so it's really important. So we need to lean into this and we need to embrace the security stuff, okay? And so I'm going to challenge you this afternoon at the end to kind of go forth and conquer the security world, okay? All right, but here's some of the people that we're going to talk about today. And yes, this is my own artwork. It might be worth something someday, so, no photography, please. So this is our information security guy. You'll see him a little bit. This is our developer, okay? Our product owner, our architect. Architects have bow ties, just so you know. Infrastructure guys, right? Yeah. These are realistic, based on real people. Okay, now I want to talk about waterfall. So do you remember when we used to do waterfall? What were the problems with waterfall? Took forever, slow, lots of handoffs. Yep, missed requirements. Yeah, lots of problems, right? I'd assert that one of the big problems is that we've got this handoff culture, right? The analysts do their thing, they hand it off to the architects and the designers who do their thing, they hand it to the developers who do their thing to hand it to, And we know that testing changes requirements, and development changes requirements, and architecture changes based on testing, and all these things are interrelated, right? It's not a good way to hand off. So what we did is we came up with this cool thing called Agile, and we said, hey, let's eliminate the handoffs, and let's actually work together and talk to each other. Crazy concept, okay? But here's the problem. We had this little problem with Agile, and you guys probably know this because you're here today, right? We forgot something. Where's the handoff in Agile? Ops, right? So we said, hey, we need to bring these infrastructure folks in. And so we said, hey, let's bring them in up front too, and let's actually talk to them too, and let's actually work together. And now we have this DevOps thing. But what else are we missing? Security handoff, right? You guys had the security handoff? They come in and they go, you must do all of this stuff, right? And you're like, But they just swoop and poop, right? They give you all the list of stuff that you have to do, and then they're off. And it's not negotiable, right? Security guys say, nope, we got to do it all. Okay, so here's what we need to do. We need to include security. And no, I'm not going to say anything lame like DevSecOps or anything, okay? We don't need another name. We just need, when we're talking DevOps, we need to know security is part of the picture, okay? So when we talk about including security, I'm going to start with a few compliance myths. First off, that you need a lot of documentation. Does everybody feel like they need a lot of documentation for security or for compliance stuff? Everybody I talk to, it's like documentation, documentation, documentation. We need to document the process. We need to document this. We need to document that. Okay? Well, technically, you just have to have enough documentation so that you can prove that you're in compliance. You don't need reams and reams of documentation. And hopefully what you'll see here soon is some ways that you can create that documentation pretty easily. Okay? It's heavyweight. And I think that's kind of like waterfall. I think that's we kind of waterfall security. We get this big block of stuff that we have to take into account for compliance. And so if we break that down into user stories and do the things that we do when we do Agile, then we should be good. Doesn't need to be as heavy. And then probably the big one is the all or nothing, right? As you can imagine, did you guys know that you, according to like NIST, you shouldn't have an email address as a username? How many people knew that? Sweet, couple of people. Right, so that's a compliance item. But if you use email address as a username, do you think you're going to get shut down by the government? What if you are PCI compliant and you're storing cardholder information on a public SharePoint site? Right? That's probably a little bigger deal. And compliance is all riddled with this kind of stuff. There's small things, there's guidance, and then there's the things that really matter. So it's not an all or nothing game. It really is working with security, just like you work with your product owners, just like you work with your infrastructure, and have conversations and figure out priorities and how can we do this. So the important thing is it's necessary, right? Resource constrained. This is what I'm going to challenge you guys with. How many security folks do you have in your organization compared to IT people? What's the ratio? 1 to 50? Right? So no wonder these guys come in with just a big list of stuff to do and like throw it in your lap, right? They have to support, like there's 1 or 2 folks in a lot of companies that have to support a lot of people. And they don't just support IT, do they? They support other business units. They're building incident response plans. They're doing all kinds of stuff that we don't ever have to deal with. Okay? So these guys are really, really busy. And then the other thing is that this is always changing. You hear of another vulnerability every week. You hear of new laws, new compliance. Does anybody know what's the new European Union one that just got released? GDPR, yeah, right? So they've always got to be on top of this stuff. So this stuff is complicated stuff. And so I used to dislike the security folks, but now I actually feel bad for them because I've gotten to know what they actually have to deal with every day. And now here's the other thing that I think is important. You're probably doing a lot more than you think, okay? Like we had the hands raised here that you shouldn't use username or email as username, right? How many people feel like they know that when you log in as a username and password if you get the password wrong, you're not supposed to tell them you got the password wrong. How many people know that? Hopefully everybody, right? Did you know that's actually a NIST and ISO control that says from a compliance perspective, you cannot have a username and password? So there's a lot of this stuff that you're doing already that you just don't know it. You're doing a lot of compliance type work and not knowing it, and it's just a matter of documenting it. So that's what I'll show you quickly here. We'll kind of go through a process that you could potentially follow or adapt to implement security and compliance into your Agile or DevOps practice. Okay? Okay, so the way it works today, in my experience, is that our teams, we get together and we start talking with the product owner and the architects and everybody. Say, well, here's our story breakdown or our epics, or insert whatever fancy Agile stuff you want to insert in there. But we got these security folks on the outside. They're not involved in that conversation, right? And so we just kind of do all this stuff in a vacuum, and that's what leads to the poop and swoop, or swoop and poop behavior, right? Because they're outside, and then we're not involving them until too late. So now, what we really want to do is we want them, when we start looking at the portfolio or epic level, we want these folks involved right then and there. Okay? Because their job at this point is an amazing job. Their job is to cut scope, not add scope. Why do you think I say that? Any ideas? No? Quiet? Okay. So here's the thing. They're there to advise the portfolio team or the epic team on, like, what are the laws? What are the regulations? Like, if we do this, what kind of compliance activities is that going to cause us to fall under, or what additional stuff do we have to do, right? Here, our InfoSec dude is saying, that this might cause us to fall under GLBA, which is it's for financial advisors, financial institution item. But so under GLBA, so maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe he's got an option to, we can do it this way, and then we can avoid that altogether, right? If we don't do this piece, then we don't need to worry about compliance for any of this. So that's kind of the first step, is just to get them involved at that high level and say, okay, here's what we're working on. How does compliance impact this? Does that make sense? How much time does that take? Because remember, these are scarce resources. Yeah, not too much time. Hopefully half an hour, depending on the, right? So that shouldn't be too burdensome. As soon as we start burdening them too much, they're not going to have time for it because they're so busy. So we always want to be really cognizant of their time. Okay, so then you've got your story kind of, or your epic kind of crafted, and then you get into the story breakdown, right? So now we're going to go ahead and involve our security guy in our story breakdown as well, because one of the things that tends to happen is we tend to split out stories, and stories come out that are like compliance-related, compliance-specific stories, right? So here's one where security-specific story, we need to ensure our system can withstand a denial of service attack. Okay? That's probably not the type of story that I'm going to pick as a developer or split out as a product owner, right? This is why it's important for these folks to be in the room, because they think about this stuff, we don't. The important thing here is inside the JIRA ticket that we've got for this story, notice up here we've got NIST, I can't read that, NIST SC5. And what we've done here is we've actually just taken the control right out of the NIST manual and we've dropped that into the description of the story. So you might start to see a pattern here. Maybe, could this be used as documentation in an audit? Yeah, this is documentation, right? You're already doing a lot of this stuff. You probably already create stories and you put descriptions in JIRA or Rally or whatever tool you're using. That's documentation. Even though it's not maybe nicely printed that I can hand somebody, it's a start, okay? Now, you might have some infrastructure stories. And again, in this new infrastructure story, this is configuring a MySQL server. These are all the controls that we have to have on the MySQL server. Okay? And we've just added that in. Our security guys have helped us add these in too. Okay, now we get into acceptance criteria. Okay, so now we've got our stories. We've split out some specific stories. And then now we'll talk about what are the acceptance criteria for each of those stories. And again, our InfoSec person can say, oh, hey, by the way, that not sharing the password information, or leaking that information, that actually corresponds to a control. So what we can do is we can document that, right? So we just go into the acceptance criteria, and just you can see on the right-hand side there, I hope, that we just added the NIST control next to that little acceptance criteria. So we know that that acceptance criteria is for that control. Then there's a lot of stuff we don't think about that they can go ahead and add in. And this one I mentioned earlier, username must not be email address, which is one that a lot of people don't know, right? So the cool thing is, part of these conversations is we're starting to, just like when we started involving infrastructure or testers or all these other folks, we start to learn a little bit more about security as we go, and we're transferring that knowledge to the whole team. So we're distributing that knowledge, and it's not siloed into one person, right? Okay, so now, with this knowledge transfer, we have these questions. We can ask questions and talk about it. Okay, so now what do? We've got our stories, we've got our acceptance criteria. Now it's go time, right? This is where we actually build stuff. I think that's what we get paid for, is building stuff. Okay, so what do we do in the sprint? Okay, so one approach that we found that's fairly useful is to have the QA folks. Are there any QA folks in the room? Okay, are you guys engineers, QA engineers, like developer QAs? Okay. Do you know QAs? Probably people in this room know QA professionals that are like, I don't want to do test automation, and all this automation is scaring me. What's my job look like? Anybody know any of those? I know a lot of them, right? And that's okay. I don't think every tester should be a developer, and we can talk after beers about that, but over beers about that. But so what I've had success with is we started having the QAs actually pair with the InfoSec folks, because QA is a risk management activity, right? Compliance is a risk management activity. And by the way, if you're a manual QA and you get into information security, you could probably make more money. So it's easy for me to sell them on it too, right? So what we'll do is we'll have those two pairing, and we'll start doing things like writing cucumber scenarios together, right? And now what's happening is there's some knowledge transfer going on between the QA and the InfoSec person. And the QA becomes kind of like, just like you guys probably have how many of you have a product owner that's maybe not the actual product owner, they're a proxy for somebody else, right? That's what you have here, right? The QA folks don't, especially to start off with, they aren't the experts at any of this compliance stuff, but they're the proxy, and they're the ones that are kind of managing the work between the two, the security folks and the development team. Okay, so they're working through the scenarios. They go ahead and get those scenarios created. And then the tester is now going to go and pair with the developer and explain all the scenarios and kind of walk through all the compliance stuff with the developers. Okay, so these are all cucumber scenarios here. Then if your InfoSec person has time, they can obviously mobbing, the more the merrier, right? But typically I don't see that because their time is limited. And then now on infrastructure stories, we kind of have the same thing. Here are the docs for securing some things. It's the same kind of deal, but our testers, being the proxy for that InfoSec person, can pair with those infrastructure folks. Okay, now we get into implementation. And that's where I'm a recovering developer, but I still love developing. So this is kind of the fun part for me. So what if we've got these scenarios, what if we could actually link all of this stuff together? Well, like, look at here. What if we have a custom annotation? You see it says NIST, and then we have the control, and then the JIRA ticket that it's associated with, right? And now that's tagged on the actual test case. Is that cool or what? No? Okay, I think it's pretty cool. Right? And we'll talk about why here in a little bit. Okay? But how much time do you think that takes to go ahead and throw an annotation on the top of a test to say this test is for this control? Yeah. 30 seconds? Pretty simple stuff, right? Okay? This one's just an example where we have multiple controls in multiple tickets on one test. And then on the infrastructure side, hopefully we're doing DevOps. We're probably using tools, and I'm not an infrastructure as code person, so I don't know all the fanciness tools that are out there these days. But you've got your configuration here. You've got that's a document, right? Your server configuration is a document. Is that considered documentation? It can be. You see why I say you're doing a lot of this stuff already? It doesn't get more documented than the actual executable script that configures a server. Right? So we can do the same thing here. Okay, so what about the documentation? So what did we do for documentation? We had our portfolios, we had our JIRA tickets in there. Then as we split stories out, we were adding all the compliance controls into all of the stories, right? We got the acceptance criteria. We wrote cucumber tests, right? We committed our code. I didn't show that, I don't think, but we committed our code with the JIRA ticket that we committed the code for. We annotated our tests with the JIRA ticket and the control, right? So we don't have any documentation to do. All of that traceability from an application compliance perspective is done. You did it all along the way, a little bit at one line of code at a time or one line of JIRA description at a time. It's already there. Okay? So we broke them down. We mapped our scenario test to security controls. We tagged our tests with the compliance information. And so now I want to talk about continuous delivery and what makes it really cool. Okay? This is the good stuff. So once you have that, we're a bunch of developers in this room. We love writing code. What if we could write in our continuous delivery pipeline a Jenkins plugin that actually read through all of the JIRA tickets and read through all the commits and read through the code and actually generated an automated report, compliance report on every build? Now, this is a really low-tech one, right? You can make it as fancy but now every build, you can see that we have the ticket, a control, the test name, and it's just a report now. And we can pick that up, and you can bundle that up in a zip file after every build and have it dropped into a directory, and when it comes audit time, you just go to whatever the last zip file is, and you go, here, this is our documentation. And we didn't have to do that much work for that, right? Other than actually talking to the security people, which I know we don't like to do, but other than that, that's the hard part. We really didn't have to do much, okay? All right, so there's other compliance items that if you use Maven, if you're a Java shop, right? Third-party licenses, there's a Maven plugin for that. From a compliance perspective, you have to generate lists, you have to know what all the licenses are for all your jars and their dependencies, right? There's a plugin for that. Add that into your continuous delivery pipeline and put it in your same audit folder, right? You do web attack stuff. Create Jenkins plugin that goes out and hammers on your system and does pen tests and all kinds of stuff like that. You can put Metasploit and you can put your own custom Metasploit stuff in there. You put that in there. And then the output of that gets run and it gets put into your audit folder. Right? Okay. So these are just some other integrations that we've done that you can put into your pipeline. help make sure that you're continual compliance. But we can't really automate all of it, so you still want to hire like manual pen testers and security testing. You know, if your QAs are so inclined, they can start learning some of that kind of stuff. And then now, even though they're not actually writing automated tests, they're adding value because they're doing security type testing. Okay, so we can't automate everything, but we can certainly get most of the way, right? Okay, there's a couple of things on adoption that I'm going to go over just real quick. So, first thing is, how many developers, when they hear traceability, groan? It's okay. You can raise your hand. No, people like traceability now? We never used to. Stupid traceability. Well, the thing is, if you can create tools that actually make it easier for people to do their job and make them want to do traceability, then that's a really cool thing. So this is an example of one thing that we built that's we call it defect density heat map. What this is all the files we commit with our ticket numbers, right? And this is all these files, and what happens is the size of the file name is how many unique tickets that file changed for. So file 38 changed a lot for a lot of unique tickets. If we committed five changes on file 38 for one ticket, that doesn't count as 5 changes, that only counts as 1 change. So it's how many unique tickets. But then the other side of that is the color. Notice some of them are red and some of them aren't. What our heat map does is it goes out and it looks at all those ticket changes, and it looks at the ratio of defects to features. So file 47 there changes a lot, and it's all defects. So what does that mean to you as a developer? Give that to the guy that's out of the office today. Yeah, that story is going to go to John today because he's not here. Yeah, right? So now what we've done is we've taken something mundane like linking stories with a Jira ticket or commits with a Jira ticket, and we've turned it into something useful for a developer. Here's another one along the same lines, and I won't get into too much of what this is, but basically this is risk-based testing for you testers out there. It's just a matrix, and what this is a screenshot of a tool we built that goes out and it looks at code changes in the Git repo, and what it does is it looks for, if you have a story like story 1, I don't know what story it is on here, story 205, and what it does is it looks at all the other code, all the other commits that change the same code as story 205. And it looks to see whether there's defects, those commits were defects, and then it basically builds a probability of like, holy crap, this is likely to break. So we better retest this because it changed a lot of the same code as this other piece. And then what the testers do is they can actually drag each one of these little cards over, right? And when they drag these cards over, what that's doing is they're saying this is high impact. So on the x-axis, this is impact. The y-axis is probability. So the testers now are able to go and they're going to say, I'm going to test the top right stuff for sure, and then if I have time, I'll test the other stuff. Okay? But now what that also does on the back end, our dirty little secret is that actually, without that traceability, we wouldn't be able to generate this. And it actually puts a little bit of metadata on the back end. And it starts to store information about the code that you changed. And here we've got a little IntelliJ plugin. You might not be able to see it very well. It's on the bottom right that says rng.js has a severity score of 57, so that means it's important. Or 97, I'm sorry. So that means this is really important code. So now it's providing us as developers feedback to how we need to spend more time on this code, or this is important code. How many people have tried to argue with a product owner before about fixing technical debt and not got anywhere? Yeah, me too. What if we had something like this where we could start to build more of like a financial model that actually helps us support our argument that we need to fix that? It'd be a lot easier to have that argument, right, or that conversation. And that's all because we've added the traceability information and all this kind of stuff in there. So I just want to show you that to encourage you to really look at some of that traceability stuff because it helps from a security and compliance perspective, and it helps actually from the information you can glean from your development cycle. Okay, so hopefully I showed you how we got from traditional DevOps and how we can bring continuous compliance into the picture by including security. So it's not really that difficult to integrate these two. But the important thing here is that these guys are busy. And now it's time for my challenge to you guys. Okay? These are the three big compliance bodies. But then there's SOX and PCI and HIPAA and all kinds of other stuff out there that we have to deal with every day, right? So these guys don't have time. So we need to either buy more information security people, which how many people do you think you can go and say, hey, we need to hire a new InfoSec person for every development team we have? It's probably not going to work, right? So my challenge to you guys is we need to build InfoSec into our ecosystem and into our culture. And that starts with you guys getting involved with information security, right? And put your InfoSec hats on. Start to learn this stuff. Start to think like this, right? Because it's really important today that we have a good security and compliance program. A lot of bad press for a lot of companies these days, right? Okay, so that's it for me. Wow, I actually got done early, which is unusual for me. So if you have any questions, comments, have at it. And if you want useful slides, you can, even though I have Agile Iowa, July 7th, you can email that address. And I actually took all this content. You know, the slides are pretty light on content. And I've written like a little mini book with all of the stuff that I talked about in it. So then you can share it with people. And so that way you don't have to share, well, he was talking about this and this. And you know how it is to try to share stuff afterwards. So just shoot me an email and I'll send you like this in booklet form that's actually something you can read. All right? Thanks.